All right. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. We are so glad for the people that are going to be joining us today for this amazing time, this amazing presentation. We're going to let people come in for about a minute or so, and then we'll dive right into this wonderful time that we have ahead of us. Thank you all again for coming through. It's going to be amazing, and we're so thankful to this time being where we are. All right. So greetings, guests. Welcome to the Prince George's African American Museum and Cultural Center. Our museum's virtual program is going to be Harriet Tubman, Her Life and Legacy in Maryland. Born enslaved in Dorchester County, Maryland, Araminta Ross successfully escaped bondage and then went on to become a Union spy, abolitionist, and a women's suffragist. This discussion is going to explore her life, her work, and her impact in Maryland with Maryland archivist Maya Davis. Now, before proceeding further, I just want to go ahead and thank the Prince George's African American Museum Board of Directors. I also want to thank Mayor Philip Bermudez, who is our marketing coordinator, and I want to thank Maya Davis, our esteemed guest, and all of you, our guests, for joining us today. We hope that you enjoy the program today and that you're inspired by today's discussion in ways that you can remember for the rest of this year and beyond. And so with that being said, we are going to begin the program with a discussion with Maya Davis. And at the end of it, of course, just to let you guys know, we're going to leave room for questions from the audience. So please, if you have a question, write your question into the chat box when we come to that portion of the program. So let's begin. Let me give you a brief bio on who Maya Davis is. Maya Davis is the legislative liaison and research archivist at the Maryland State Archive, where she consults on statewide projects that document, interpret, and preserve African American history and culture. Maya currently serves as a commissioner of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She is also with the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture, and she's a board member of the Prince George's County Historical Society. Previously, she served as an interim director of the Banneker-Douglass Museum and the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. She was also on staff at the City Museum of Washington, D.C., and a vice chair of the Annapolis 1864 Commission to commemorate the emancipation of slavery in Maryland. So again, I just want to take some time to throw that out there for everyone, because it's going to be a gem today, having the brilliance of Maya Davis. So Maya, thank you again for coming through today. And I just want to ask you a beginning question. We'll have about 4 questions, but the first one is the following. What are some of the things that you find fascinating with Harriet Tubman historically?
Gabriel, first, let me say thank you for having me. And in regards to some of the things that I find fascinating about Tubman, I would have to say one is her resiliency to overcome enslavement, the treatment of enslaved individuals, and especially enslaved Black women. I think that is such a feat for anyone, not just Tubman, but the actions that she took, considering that she was 15 years on the run, what we consider on the run, that she was able to participate in anti-slavery activities as well as women's suffrage rights. I think that is just so amazing to me. I think it's just one of the things that speaks to the type of person that she was. And you know, if you've never been to the State House to see our latest statue, it is built to size. She was approximately 5 feet. She's so small in stature, but she was super, super, super strong, both internally and physically, and just made great strides in everything that she did. I think you're muted, Gabe.
I am so sorry about that. My assumption, of course, is that you have a presentation for us today. Am I correct on that?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
So with that being said, please, with the information you just shared with us, would you please show us just how awesome Harriet Tubman was?
Okay, and I think you're going to have to allow me to participate by sharing my screen. Okay.
Now ready to go.
All right, thank you so much.
Of course.
Of course, you know, technology being what it is, it starts your slides from the very end. Today, my presentation is titled Harriet Tubman, A Woman Worthy to be Praised. And I just want to begin by acknowledging that we are in Women's History Month, and it's really special that we get to celebrate a woman such as Harriet Tubman. And today I was so delighted. I saw Miss Niani Kilkenny is in the audience. I just have to say she doesn't know it, I don't think, that she greatly impacted my life. But when I was a student at Howard University, I had my first internship at the Smithsonian American History Museum with Alonzo Smith. And he really allowed me to work closely with Niani Kilkenny and her interns. And it's just been so great. So while we're in this moment of Women's History Month, I'm so delighted to see Miss Kilkenny here. So thank you so much. And as I said, we are now recognizing Harriet Tubman Day. And I just want to take this moment to kind of reflect and thank those people who really pushed for us to have a Harriet Tubman Day here in Maryland. This work began back in the 90s, federally, but on a state level, it really was a grassroots effort. And one of the earliest people that I remember doing this work was Mr. Lou Fields in Baltimore, who advocated to members of the legislature as well as the governor to make sure that Harriet Tubman was recognized by her state. We know that she and Douglass are both very much, I would say, global figures, but on a state level, we had just not done enough. And Lou Fields really pushed for that. But I'd also like to recognize members of the Ross family who are descended from her father's line of the family, her great-grandniece, Tina Wyatt, local historians in Cambridge, Bill Jarman and the Harriet Tubman Museum, the original Harriet Tubman Museum, which predated the current museum system that we have here today in Visitor Center in Church Creek. Also historian Kate Larson, Ann Kyle and Marcy Ross with the Department of Tourism, and Chris Haley with the State Archives, Ellen Mooson with the Harriet Tubman conference that she put on every year, Dana Patera and Angela Crenshaw of the current state park, and the late John Creighton and Linda Dwyer, who also gave much of their time and effort to the life and legacy of Harriet Tubman. And I'm just so happy that we now have this as a state recognized day. Programs take place across the state to memorialize Harriet Tubman and the legacy that she leaves here in our state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by talking about a young Harriet Tubman. As many people are just very familiar with her work later on in life, but like all of us, she was someone's child, and I think it's very important to us to put that into context. The woman that we know as Harriet Tubman was born Araminta Ross around 1821 on the plantation of Anthony Thompson in an area called Peters Neck in Dorchester County on the eastern shore of Maryland. And I included this screenshot that I have here. This is from a record. The writing is very small, which is why I've kind of zoomed in on it. But this is from a record that we have at the Maryland State Archives from the accounts of Anthony Thompson, her owner, where we believe this is probably the closest thing to a birth record that we actually have for Harriet Tubman. It is actually, you can see here on March 15th, cash to be paid for a midwife for Negro Writ. Writ was her mother and was the only writ owned by Thompson at the time. So we believe this was Harriet's actual birth record, and all other secondary sources, including that of Sarah Bradford, who interviewed Tubman later on, actually put her at being born around 1821 or 22. So it's really exciting for us to kind of have this document in our holdings. Tubman was the fifth of 9 children born to Harriet Writ Green, as you see here, her name is Writ, they call her Writ, and Ben Ross, who were enslaved. And this being the condition, it kind of predetermined Harriet's life that she would also be enslaved. Her father, Ben, was owned by Anthony Thompson, while her mother was owned by Edward Broadus, the son of Thompson's second wife, Mary Patterson Broadus. Edward, who was a minor, legally owned Tubman, her mother, and siblings. And it was through this union of Thompson and Broadus that Tubman's parents, Ben and Writ, met and started a family. Her siblings included Lina, who was born about 1808, Mariah Ritty, who was born in 1811, Soph, born in 1813, Robert in 1816, and then Minty, or as we call her, Harriet Tubman, in 1822. Rachel, born around 1825, Ben in 1823, Henry in 1830, and Moses in 1832. And if you noticed the dates that I left off, you can kind of see there's a lot of gaps in there. And there is a possibility that what we're seeing there are patterns of either child loss during that time or miscarriages on the part of the mother. Mary Broadus Thompson died in 1810, and Thompson became the guardian of her son, Edward Broadus, until he reached the age of 21. At that age, he was legal to claim independence and his rights to his property, which included writ and her children. Tubman, her mother, and her siblings were moved from the Thompson plantation to Broadus's own farm near Bucktown. Harriet's father was now separated from his wife and his children. Minty grew up amongst a community of both enslaved and free Blacks living on the Eastern Shore, and she later recalled having to care for her younger siblings when she was as young as 5 years old. While her mother was forced to work in the master's home, Minty was old enough she was eventually hired out to work at homes herself. She suffered great abuse at the hands of the individuals to whom she was hired out and recalled being whipped daily by one of her mistresses, which left scars that remained visible throughout her life. The working conditions were typically horrible. At times, she was forced to labor in icy waters in the winter to set muskrat traps. She often became sick, which led to her repeatedly being returned to Broadus. Once she became healthy again, Tubman would be hired out. During this time, she lost family members through this same slave trade. Broadus sold 3 of Tubman's sisters, Lina, Mariah Ritty, and Soph, to out-of-state buyers. This separation fractured enslaved families. This was no institutional thing that was just happening to Tubman. This is pretty common, especially on the Eastern Shore. He used the proceeds of their sales to purchase land. To further complicate matters, Broadus refused to liberate her mother, Rit, when she reached the age of 45, as determined in the will of his great-grandfather, Athel Patterson, who was the original owner of Rit when she was a child. If Broadus had honored the will, it would have freed Rit and also provided for the liberation of her children, including young Minty, once they reached the age of 45. Around 1834, Tubman was nearly killed by a blow to the head from an iron weight, which I know is a story that most people are very familiar with. And it was actually thrown at her by mistake by an overseer who was trying to hit a fleeing slave. She had been hired out as a field hand to a farmer and was called to accompany him, the plantation cook, to the local dry goods store to purchase items for the kitchen. When they arrived at the store, Tubman attempted to block the path of the overseer, who was in pursuit of the enslaved boy. The overseer picked up a weight from the store counter and threw it, intending to hit the fleeing slave, but it struck Tubman, fracturing her skull. She was eventually forced to return to work in the fields, and the severe injury left her suffering from headaches and seizures, which remained with her for life. And if you've ever read some of the accounts of individuals who've actually interviewed and talked with Tubman, she will have talked about actually working in the fields and having sweat and blood dripping from her head from this injury. So that's about how soon she actually went back to work. This was not something that was healed in enough time for her to return to work. She was actually put back to work. And it kind of just is very indicative of the culture of the time and how enslaved individuals were forced to labor through really tough injuries and just work in harsh conditions. Tubman was hired out to John Stewart, a farmer, merchant, and shipbuilder, bringing her near where her father lived. And she first labored in Stewart's house, then began working in the fields, docks, and timber yards. Broadus eventually allowed Tubman to hire herself out after paying him a yearly fee of $60 for the privilege to work for herself. It was during this time that Tubman learned the secret networks of communication from Black mariners and her father. They were part of a large world of towns and cities up and down the eastern coast in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. And this network that I'm speaking of is what we now call the Underground Railroad. And the Underground Railroad is really a specific time period dating from about 1830 to the end of enslavement as a whole in this country. So anything earlier than that, we kind of identify as the flight to freedom. But this institution, it really heightened around 1830 and increased the amount of people that actually escaped. So this is, the system was already in place. A lot of times, I've heard small children say, well, Harriet Tubman invented the Underground Railroad. And, it's just really important that we just let her know that Harriet Tubman was a part of a much larger organization and became familiarized with that through her father and the networks of individuals in the Dorchester County area. Around 1844, she married John Tubman, a free man. John Tubman was born of free parents, but like many of his siblings and other friends and relatives, he married an enslaved woman and had no legal rights. Any children born to them would have become the property of Edward Broadus. This practice of free and enslaved marriage was common on the Eastern Shore and offered an opportunity for emancipation. And if you ever get the chance, and maybe I'll put some links in at the end of this presentation, the Maryland State Archives, we do have many of the manumission and records and certificates of freedom, which document these incidents of individuals being emancipated by their spouses. And so it's really unique to see. And if you get a chance to look at census records from about 1830 to 1860, you can look on the Eastern Shore and see that the population of free Blacks to the population of enslaved African Americans were actually about equal. They were about 50-50. So, these individuals are kind of coexisting together, and it's really a unique situation because then you have, individuals offering opportunity for freedom through marriage. So now I'm going to look at the escapes of Tubman and her siblings. Her owner, Edward Broadus, died in March of 1849. And this is usually a time when we would see enslaved individuals escaping from their owners because they are fearing things such as separation, being either sold into the Deep South or being inherited by another family member and being separated in that way. So, this is typically a time when you would kind of see these things happening outside of moments such as special occasions, such as holidays, Easter, Christmas, Thanksgiving, all of those holidays, you start to see a rise in enslaved individuals escaping. So Harriet Tubman and her siblings are no different in this case. Tubman decided that she would flee to freedom, which she had to do without her husband, unfortunately. And in her first attempt, she left with her two brothers, Harry and Ben, on September 17th, 1849. And here you see her runaway ad, the runaway ad placed by Eliza Ann Broadus for Harry, Ben, and Minty, aged about 27 years old. This particular runaway ad was placed, but they actually returned to the property and they did not leave together at that moment. Her brothers feared that they would be captured and punished for leaving the property and eventually returned. So Harriet eventually set out on her own. And this is one of the other things. I mean, like, this is a woman. Most of the time, women are often credited as being the ones who stay behind on the plantation because they're tied to the children or they work in an area such as working in the house where they're under the watchful eye of their owners and masters. But Tubman actually set out on her own without her brothers and escaped on her own and using the network of individuals that she had met while working through the Mariners areas in Dorchester County and successfully made it to freedom. And this document that you see on the right here is one that I like to share. It's from the journal of Sidney Howard Gay, who actually worked closely with Tubman in later years. And you can see he kind of makes note here of her assisting a party of four that arrived by Captain Harriet Tubman. And he makes a note at the bottom, at the very bottom, you can see Harriet Tubman 7 years ago was a slave of Edward. He put Broadhurst, but that should be Edward Broadus of Bucktown. And so it's just very indicative of the records that exist out there that kind of confirm and document Harriet's life in enslavement, but also as she worked in this network that we know today as the Underground Railroad. While Tubman was gone, she soon learned that John would not be joining her in the North. He married another woman in the community, a free woman named Caroline, and they had 4 free children. And so they continued their life there. So Tubman, refusing to sacrifice her freedom by returning and fighting for her marriage, she instead committed herself to liberating her family and friends. And from 1850 to 1860, Tubman would return to Maryland to rescue family and friends. And I'm going to jump around a little bit in terms of years because that's 1849 that we're looking at. In the spring of 1858, Tubman met John Brown, a radical abolitionist, at her home in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, where she had settled with her brothers once she rescued them, and as well as her parents and other runaways from Maryland. Tubman actually grew to dislike the weather in Canada. As you can imagine, it could be very cold, have very harsh winters, and she decided to actually leave Ontario, Canada, and settled in Auburn, New York. In 1859, William Henry Seward, Lincoln's Secretary of State, sold Tubman a home on the outskirts of Auburn, New York, where she settled with her parents and other family members. And it's important to know that some of the money she earned on her own, but she did have the support of others from abolitionist circles who helped her purchase the home outright. Money became a constant worry for her. Tubman turned to the anti-slavery lecture platform as a means to raise money for both her family and her missions. And she became a fixture at abolitionist and suffrage meetings throughout New York and Boston, sometimes using the pseudonym Harriet Garrison to protect her from slave catchers. And because of the increased vigilance on the part of the slaveholders from the Eastern Shore, she really had to be very careful. If you've read any other slave narratives over time, you will see that the slave catchers are really ruthless and relentless in trying to return enslaved individuals, to the point that they often captured free Black citizens who had never been enslaved and actually sold them back into slavery, or put them on the farms of other individuals who did not own them outright. And here you see Tubman, this picture, which I absolutely love, is Tubman with her second husband, Nelson Davis, who she went on to marry in Auburn. He was an escaped slave himself, and they actually had an adopted daughter. I'm still trying to figure out if she was a family member of either Tubman or Nelson Davis. Their adopted daughter, Gertie, and an aunt and uncle in this image. I just think that it's a really powerful picture of the journey of enslaved individuals and the legacy of Tubman. And her life in Auburn, she was very active. We have incidents that we have in our newspaper where we can kind of see her speaking on different abolitionist circuits and actually using her home to lend shelter and food for individuals who were actually escaping from enslavement, not just from Maryland, but other Southern states as well. She was definitely well known in the community and well respected by individuals, especially in the suffragist movement. She became very politicized, attending the anti-slavery meetings, Black rights conventions, and the women's suffrage meetings through the latter parts of the 1850s. It was not long before Tubman found herself challenging women's and African Americans' inferior political, economic, and social roles. She gained a trustworthy network of active reformers such as abolitionists and suffragists, Lucretia Mott, Susan B. Anthony, Martha Coffin Wright, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who was also a freeborn woman from Maryland, Edna Dow, and activist Frederick Douglass, who was also enslaved on the Eastern Shore. And here you see an image of Tubman. This picture was taken later on and it's quite blurry. I wish I had a better copy of it. But this is a picture of Tubman with members of the National Association of Colored Women. And you can kind of see her here in the middle of the picture, and she's getting older there. But she's just such an amazing picture. I just want to make sure that every image I can get up here to share with you that I can. Tubman's total commitment to destroying the slave system eventually led her to South Carolina during the Civil War, where she alternated her roles as a nurse and a scout and spy and a cook in the service of the Union Army. Eventually, she became the first American woman ever to lead an armed raid into enemy territory. In early 1862, Tubman joined Northern abolitionists in support of Union activities at Port Royal, South Carolina. Throughout the Civil War, she provided badly needed nursing care to Black soldiers and hundreds of newly liberated slaves who crowded Union camps. Tubman's military service expanded to include spying and scouting behind Confederate lines. In early June 1863, she became the first woman to command an armed military raid when she guided Colonel James Montgomery and his 2nd South Carolina Black Regiment up the Combahee River, rooting out Confederate outposts, destroying stockpiles of cotton, food, and weapons, and liberating over 700 slaves. Later that summer, Tubman witnessed the carnage inflicted upon the all-Black Massachusetts 54th Regiment on the 19th of July in 1863 at Fort Wagner. She later told an interviewer that she served the regiment's white colonel, Robert Gould Shaw, his last meal. She had become quite familiar with Shaw and his regiment, which included Frederick Douglass's 2 sons, Lewis and Charles, since they had arrived in Beaufort 6 weeks before. Tubman's description of that fateful day would long be remembered. And then we saw the lightning, and that was the guns. And then we heard the thunder, and that was the big guns. And then we heard the rain falling, and that was the drops of blood falling. And when we came to get in the crops, it was the dead that we reaped. Union losses were horrific. 1,515 were dead, wounded, missing, or captured, compared to only 174 Confederate casualties. The injured were transported to Beaufort, where Tubman provided nursing and comfort to hundreds of casualties. After the war, Tubman returned to Auburn, New York. There she began another career as a community activist, humanitarian, and suffragist. In addition to providing a home for numerous friends and relatives, she also worked to raise money for the Freedmen's Bureau, which had been established to provide education and relief to millions and newly liberated slaves. In 1869, a local author that I mentioned earlier, Sarah Bradford, published a short biography titled Scenes in the Life of Harriet Tubman, bringing brief fame and financial relief to Tubman and her family. Tubman actually received some of the funding from this, but she gave away much of the money that she received to other individuals, especially those who were aging. She actually struggled financially for the rest of her life. She was denied back pay for her services during the Civil War, and she did receive a widow's pension as the wife of Nelson Davis, and later a Civil War's nurse's pension during the 1890s. Her humanitarian work triumphed with the opening of the Harriet Tubman Home for the Aged, located on land that was on her property in Auburn, which she successfully purchased by mortgage and then transferred to the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church in 1903. Active in the suffrage movement since 1860, Tubman continued to appear at local and national suffrage conventions until the early 1900s. She died at the age of 90 in Auburn, New York. And here you see pictures of Tubman as she aged over time. One of the things that I'm proud of is some of the work that we've been able to do as a state in terms of making sure that we have state representation. And some of the artwork that you're seeing before you, one of them, the bust of her at the top left is that of Tubman from actually the Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad Visitor Center, which we opened in 2017. And I was a part of that curatorial team along with different state partners and community stakeholders to get that open and off the ground. The image beneath that was a duplicate image that was created by the same artist for Government House, because we really wanted to make sure that Government House actually had artwork that was, you know, representative of the communities in which it served. And to that point, we had actually recently installed a portrait of Frederick Douglass that was created by Simi Knox, a portrait artist. And we needed pretty much some other form of artwork of Tubman. We wanted to make sure that they were reflected, because outside of that, we were really looking at individuals who were essentially white women and men that had served in our government. And we felt like their efforts really were worthy to be recognized in our local government. And just last year, I was very proud to be a part of the curatorial team that oversaw the creation of the Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass statues for interpretation in the State House. And so we're really happy about this. And the family has also continued to do some of the hard work related around Harriet Tubman. Her great grandniece, Tina Wyatt, was invited to the Army base in Arizona, where the Hall of Fame is housed, to participate in the honorary induction ceremony back in summer 2019. And at the time, Tubman was only an honorary member, and Tina felt that Tubman deserved full military honors, not just honorary. And so she complained, and the Hall of Fame asked her to prove why she deserved this recognition. So she worked closely with historian Kate Larson, who's one of the Tubman biographers, to gather all the testimony, and which includes a lot of new research that they found. And she presented to them last fall, and the review team met. And I'm proud to announce that they decided that they were convinced. Tina got a call just last month and informed them that Tubman would receive full military honors for her role in the Combahee River Raid during the Civil War. So, Gabe, I wrapped up. I didn't make this presentation too long.
So again, thank you for everyone coming through today. We appreciate all of you. Stay safe, stay connected. And again, thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Thank you.
Me. And great seeing everybody.